Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Fog from 1980. Yes, I do realize that, of course, there is also to have been the remake of The Fog that is to have starred the Tom Welling. Of course, most people would go on and know him from the show Smallville, but then again, there is to also be a probably large amount of things that are to have existed on his IMDb page, so you might know him from those other things, like possibly the remake of The Fog. And so, whenever there was to have ever gone on and been a time that anybody was to have lit a cigarette or anybody was to have owned a fog or smoke machine, I would go on and be in fear that the fog could be occurring. But then I'd realize that people had gone on to make life choices that really would possibly not make the most sense to me. Why would you own a fog machine? When is it ever going to benefit you in your life? Why do people need to own said fog smoke machines? Makes no sense. But so, they own them anyways. But for going back into this film, we realized that John Carpenter had really just hired a lot of his Halloween stars, as well as also hiring Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. And Jamie Lee Curtis had gone on to state that it was hard for her to get any jobs after the Halloween movie had wrapped. And so, Jamie was looking for work. John Carpenter had gone on to talk to Jamie. It's like, well, hey, I don't get it why people aren't casting you either. Well, hey, I'm going on and I'm doing this Fog movie. You want to go on and just be involved? And Jamie's like, well, yeah, I want to keep working. So, hence the magical effort of the two of them just working upon this film. So, we would probably realize at some point that a lot of the stuff that probably John Carpenter used in the movie The Fog, he then eventually kind of recycled in the film Ghost of Mars, which was to have had Jason Statham within it. But regardless, we come to find that The Fog is a very cult, classic, iconic film. That, of course, is to only be an hour and 30 minutes. The first early parts of this film ends up being very much similar to Poltergeist. Of course, it's another ghost film. But then eventually we get The Fog, and eventually we get the ding-dong ditching situations at some point when these ghostly pirates are to go on and be knocking at these doors, needing to eventually get to these people. And at some point, there are certain people that answer these doors, and there's certain people that answer them, and the fog is gone because they don't have a lot of time on their hands, these ghostly beings. But so, at some point in this movie, we also are to have this DJ who is to have this unusual mic placed in front of her, and she is to take far too long within this movie to continually be shouting out Andy's name, to be said, Andy, I'm sorry, I had to go on and I had to stay here. I rationally could have gone on and myself gone to you and saved your life, but no, I decided that this lighthouse, and me being a DJ is far more important because I can go on and be able to tell people where exactly the fog is being positioned. But then also realize that that is going to be a very poor choice for me to be here, because at some point the ghosts will be coming after me, moi. And so really I probably could have gone on and saved your life and could have gotten out of this whole entire situation and legit been able to not have my life be at risk whatsoever throughout this film. But Andy, I'm sorry. My face has to get close to the microphone because I just feel the need to do so. deliciously. Anyways, I'm gonna stop playing with that microphone now, but maybe I'll pull it out later. And so, The Fog. I feel that this movie is entertaining, even though really, I feel like I'm going to go on and state that this movie's okay. It's a very weak okay, and the more and more that I really just start to talk about it, the more that okay weakens, in all honesty. But this movie is such a cult classic film. This movie is to have some interesting elements in it that eventually go on to really just be used in a lot of other things beyond, of course, the remake. And also, this movie like really presents like this interesting element of a disc jockey, which, in all honesty, doesn't get all that used much of anymore. Because like radio is just kind of not as important as it is now. But anyways, really this was just kind of a very interesting throwback of a film. But so we have these pirate ghosts and they're haunting this town, and we come to find out that this town is to have a very darkened past that is to be smothered with fog going on, and at some point killing a handful of people within its hour and 30-minute runtime. So yeah, I think it is about that time to go on and eventually just spill the beans about this film and no longer ghost this film or ghosted this film. What is the right kind of slang? Because I had gone on and listened to this one song called "Ghosted My Therapist," and man, that was a interesting but kind of weird tune. Then also I'd been listening to a lot of Nothing More lately, and man, like there are some good songs coming out of that band. Yeah, as well as also a number of other bands that I could just be rattling off right now, but I don't have the time. So, with that said, this movie deserves a thumbs up because of the just overwhelming just remake of it, but then also the existence of it. But anyways, let's go on and let's just say that I'm going to go out of my way to pause this video so I can bust out the cast list, rattle off what is to have happened within this film from the memory of which that is to exist within my noggin. Legitimately, I had gone on and seen this movie the night prior, so I'm hoping that most of the memory of this film is going to still exist all up in there. Excuse me. But anyways, I think it's about that time to go on and bust out that double five, because it's about that time to, of course, go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. All right. While thumbing through this cast list, I'm kind of a little bit confused. Why did Blake need a voice? But anyways, let's go on and let's talk about this film. So, in the very early parts of this movie, we would of course have all these kids gathering around and having an old man tell this tale. And so that is all good and great and all. But so, really, while that is all going on, we tend to have quite a bit of car alarms going on, and Sandy is to, of course, hear these car alarms and eventually is to realize that her piece of furniture is to seemingly bizarrely be moving. And so it seems a good cluster of people are to really just be aware of odd existing of things. But so we would come across Nick Castle, who is to be making his way into town, and he is to all of a sudden notice that there is a hitchhiker thumb in her way, and that, of course, is to be Jamie Lee Curtis, Elizabeth Sully. So, maybe it's Sully. I don't really know how that's exactly pronounced. Let me know in the comments below. So, Nick is to go on and answer the hitchhiking call. And so Elizabeth is to get into Nick's car, and she is to go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like, I have a real question for you. Like, are you weird? And Nick is to go on and be like, yeah, I'm weird. I'm so weird. And Elizabeth is like, oh, thank God. If anything, the last person that I had got on and bummed a ride from, like, they were so normal, but then also they wanted to ask for my hand in marriage, and like I said no because of how normal they were. But it also, we would come to find Elizabeth had like seemingly Nick be the 13th, I guess, supposed driver of hers, and so Nick is to, of course, go on and say, it's like, oh man, not only am I weird, but I'm also unlucky. But really, with how things eventually turn out with this film, it seemed that Nick is going to get pretty lucky. But sadly enough, Jamie Lee Curtis had gone on and stated it seemed that the only real guy that she was to go on and liked kissing was Dan Aykroyd, sadly enough. But maybe we would, of course, have to say maybe Tom was a close second. Tom Atkins, who gone on to play Nick Castle in this film. But who knows? Yeah, I don't know. But so we would have Elizabeth, we would have Nick, who is driving, and all of a sudden, every single one of their windows and windshield are to break. And so, like, I was assuming, like, Stone Cold Steve Austin was gonna bust out, or like the Terminator was gonna like come in and just be like, yeah, come with me if you want to live. Cause yeah, like the Terminator ends up busting a windshield, and I'm like, man, like a windshield is not an easy thing to break, but it seems that for this car, it's just as easy as any other piece of glass. So Nick and Elizabeth are to go on and kind of look at one another and be like, hey, are you okay? Yeah. Are you okay? Yeah. Like, what the heck was that? So there are to, of course, realize some unusual happenings are to be coming upon this town, as well as also we are to have Stevie Wayne, who is to, of course, uh, have her son Andy bring her this piece of wood that is to have the word of Dane upon it. Because I believe there is to have been a ship called Elizabeth Dane, but don't exactly quote me on that, because I think right after that they end up saying some other name of some other ship, and names could get confusing at some point. But at least I know the Dane part. Give me credit for that, at least. The name is not Dane, it's Delula. But anyways, we would have Stevie going on and getting this piece of wood that eventually will leak and burst into flame. Very unusual, but if anything, I guess a piece of wood can go on and do quite a bit of interesting things, like grow and go inside somebody. Anyways, moving on. So Stevie, of course, is to obtain said piece of wood, and at some point she is to go on and bring it into her DJ station. And again, that's where it ends up bursting into flame. To where when Stevie is to go on and take a fire extinguisher to this piece of wood, it seems that everything is to kind of come off normal and just kind of freak her out. But so, Stevie is to go on and eventually, like, call up Andy and just be like, well, hey, where did you get this piece of wood? And Andy is to say, it's like, well, like, at first I saw this gold coin, and so when I was to go on and obtain it, like, I got this piece of wood instead, and so I decided to just get the piece of wood. So, Stevie had gone on and talked to Dan O'Bannon, who's to be the weatherman. And Stevie had talked to Dan, and it seems that Dan was going to be busy going to this party. And it seems weirdly that Stevie and Dan have this kind of weird romantic thing going on between them, really just needing to consistently be on these phone calls together, but it really becomes nothing more than that, it seems. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's not, but either way. We say upon this film that Stevie is to talk to Dan and is to notice a fog coming in. So, we would, of course, also have this weatherman notice that there is to be a ship kind of to be in the way of the fog also. And so Stevie is to say, it's like, well, yeah, like, I guess that can just kind of waste 30 seconds of airtime for me to just go on and state through this radio that like the ship is to have existed and the fog is rolling in. So we would have these men on this ship, and they're to all decide to get drunk this day because why not? And we come to find that our people are to be poking their head out of this window, and they're to go on and talk about how hot the DJ is, but she has a kid and this and that. So we would come to find that one of the men are to notice the fog outside, and so they are to just kind of make their way out there. And one of the other men are to look into the radar and notice that a ship, it seems, is coming. Very unusual. So, while one of the men are to go on and be outside, we would come to find that they are going to be met by a assortment of hooks and stabby-like things. And then eventually the guy who is to also be upon the radar is to slowly but surely get a ghost upon himself and get murdered as well. With, of course, having us probably realize that the third guy is also going to get murdered. So, eventually all our characters, it seems, are to be tied to the Grassy Sea or DeGrasse boat, whichever name of which that ship is to legitimately have. But anyways, the very next day is to have occurred. And so we'd have Nick and we'd have Elizabeth, and they are to really have Nick be curious about this boat. So Nick is to have gone on and needed to make his way to this dockmaster character and asked about the boat, and the guy had gone on to state as well, like, it's not unusual for a boat to kind of just continue to just kind of be out there. And Nick is like, well, yeah, but like I'm gonna have to go on, and I'm gonna need a friend of mine to kind of get me to this boat and find it so I can check out what happened. So they eventually go on and do so. And so we have Kathy and we have Stacy. Or Kathy and Sandy. My apologies. So the two of them are looking into this whole statue ceremony, and they eventually are to make their way to this church. Come to find out, we are to have Father Malone, who is to have the night prior gone on to have John Carpenter's character say to him, it's like, yeah, I kind of need you at a different time of day. And John Carpenter's character should be like, well, okay. And then he walks off. Father Malone is to all of a sudden a crack within the ceiling that is to lead him to this ledger, or to this just book of sorts, and he is to go on and read it. Come to find out, this story is to have been from his grandfather. So Father Malone, when finding both Sandy and Kathy, is to want to take them into a separate room and start rattling off this story. So if Kathy and Sandy had started to go through the town, and Kathy is to kind of consistently tell Sandy, it's like, well, you know what? Kind of annoying, but at least you keep me organized. Or eventually in the later half, she's like, well, yeah, like, you're kind of annoying, but like, I do like you, kind of thing. Anyways, Kathy and Sandy are to go on and find out from Father Malone while reading this story that his ancestor was to have gone on and murdered people in the whole, like, starting of this town. And eventually we also come to find out that there is to be a gold cross, which had really been from, like, this treasure that they had gone on and stole from these pirates. So Father Malone, just kind of crushed about hearing of this story and to have been betrayed by his ancestor, really had no real interest in having any kind of speech of any kind for the statue that they were to have gone on and had from the anniversary of this town. So we would have Kathy and we would have Sandy, who's like, well, like, we're still kind of forced to still need to put this together. Like, we put so much effort into it. And really, at some point, we're going to have to go on and kind of break it to people and tell it the truth. But we're not going to do that today, obviously. Or maybe we're just going to hide this for the rest of our lives. And it'll be like the Freddy Krueger situation. So we have Nick and we have Elizabeth that make their way on to the DeGrasse, the ship, the thing with the words and the such. So they make their way on to the ship, and they come to find out that, like, everything of it is broken. Like, the thermometer is broken, the compass broken. So the words of which that I'm going to probably say next, broken. So Nick ends up kind of noticing all of these kind of things of just like, well, yeah, like, feels like this boat was kind of completely tipped over, and we're kind of just seeing the aftermath of all of this. So they continue to make their way through this boat, and they realize that it seems at first that there is to be no one within it. So Nick and Elizabeth are to eventually kind of sit down at some part of this boat, and Nick is to go on with this story that he is to have had about I think his father, who was to have gone on and supposedly obtained this piece of gold and put it in his pocket. By the time of which that he was to have gone on and met Nick and wanted to have shown him this thing, the gold had disappeared. And so, while Nick is going on and telling this story, we are to all of a sudden see that this locker is to start to want to open itself, and items are to be falling out of this locker, and so Elizabeth is to have been frightened by that. But then eventually she's also going to be frightened by the body that is being flung upon her, scaring her for life, traumatizing her forever. So, we then would have this body obviously being placed within a hospital, and Elizabeth is to have been by herself within the room of the dead body, and Nick is to go on and talk to the coroner, and it seems that they are to figure out that this body is to have seemingly been drowned, even though it doesn't make any rational sense for it to have been drowned. That is the way in which they assumed that this body had been seemingly had the evidence of death. So, while Nick and this coroner are going on and just chatting away, this body is to get up upon its own fruition of it already have been dead, and is to just make its way, scalpel in hand, to Elizabeth. And by the time that Elizabeth is to cry in fear, and Nick is to, and the coroner, make their way back to Elizabeth, the body is to fall over. Okay. Freaking weird, but okay. That body didn't mean to kill nobody, but anyways. Really, you would think after that, these people would not want to go on and have any involvement with this town. Because if a body comes back to life for some killing, then, I would just be like, okay, let's take a road trip out of this effing town because something's going horribly awry here. Obviously. Something is just coming off, very, mysterious within this place. So, if Elizabeth hadn't already gone on to decide that she's kind of just hitching her way, Incredible Hulk style, maybe she should go on. Maybe she should be thumbing up somewhere else to get her freaking way out of this town, because some weird is going on. So we have Stevie. She's doing, of course, another DJ sesh. And so Andy is to go on and be left with being sitted by Mrs. Crowbritz. And we have Stevie, who is to go on and again to talk to the weatherman, Dan O'Bannon, who, when he goes to make his way to this weather station, is to eventually had the guy talk to Dan and just be like, well, hey, like, I thought you weren't working tonight. But Dan was like, well, no, I just really love my job. But if anything, he wants to go on and just talk to Stevie one more time. So Dan is to go on and talk to Stevie, and here is when the movie is to seemingly start to pick up and bodies are to start to drop. So Dan is to go on and get this fog appear upon his place. If we were to have also not had at a point in time where Nick and Elizabeth were to have also been at home and the fog had gone on to grace their home, but by the time that Nick goes on and answers the door, the fog dissipates. It disappears. It could not wait for Nick to get to the door. But so Dan is to go on and have this fog appear near him, and Stevie is to talk to Dan and want him consistently near the phone. Dan! Don't leave the phone! Stay near me! Because I'm going to have to go on and talk to Andy as well for a very long time. Yeah. So Dan and Stevie are having this conversation while Dan is to have suspicions that there is to be a prank going on where someone is going on and knocking at his door. So Dan seeks out the possibility of a prank ding-dong ditcher of some sort. So Dan is to open the door to eventually get a face full of fingers upon a man who is to be a ghostly pirate-ish character. And so Dan is to have gotten killed. So after Stevie is to, of course, have quite a bit of gap of time where Dan is to have not have answered her or this phone call, Stevie is to naturally have assumed that, like, okay, something is going wrong with this fog. Drawing the conclusions here. So Stevie, of course, is to give notice of where this fog is going. And eventually, we will have both Nick and Elizabeth making their way to this bar, and both Kathy and Sandy, as well as a bulk of the town, are to make their way to this statute ceremony. And we would, of course, come to find that Kathy at some point is to have lost her dog in all of this, and is to have gotten the news at some point, and is to have just been just so saddened that her dog had died. I believe it was her dog. So we have this statute ceremony seemingly going off without a hitch, and I'm like, this would have been the perfect time to have murdered a bunch of people. Why didn't the fog just channel this one locale, which was clearly this ceremony, and just murder a bunch of people in one fell swoop? But no. The fog was just this slow thing that was to have gone on and just eventually tried much more to get Andy and Mrs. Krobritz. If I'm even saying that name right, I'm not quite sure. But so, the fog is to make its way to the home of which Andy is to seemingly be waiting for someone at the door at. Because Mrs. Krobritz, anyways, is to go on and try to make her way to this door that is to be knocking away. And eventually, when she's to open said door, is to try and tell Andy, it's like, well, hey, like, maybe you should go on to bed. Like, it is far too late. And Andy's like, well, can I just wait 2 seconds to see who's at this door? And so, by the time, of course, that Andy is to notice that anybody is to seemingly be coming to his home, Krobritz is to be dead, and that is all to be because Krobritz is to tell Andy just to go to his room. So Andy goes to his room, and so now Stevie is pleading for someone to save her child. And Nick had gone on to call Stevie before that was to have gone on and happened. And he had asked her about the fog and if it had gone on to be near the boats earlier. So it seems that Nick is to also have some kind of suspicions about this fog also. So Nick is to have gone on and been aware that Stevie is to have been on this radio station. And so Nick himself, as well as Elizabeth, is to drive to the home that Andy is to be present at to be able to rescue him in the nick of time, because this door is to start to bust open with the hooks and stabby things that these ghostly characters are to have. So Nick goes on, breaks this window, and is like, hey kid, like, come with me if you want to live. So Andy goes through the shattered, broken window, and they get the heck out of there. Luckily for them. So, again, we have Stevie, who is desperately pleading numerous times, Andy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I chose to stay here. Like, I needed to stay here for reasons that I'll go on and I'll list right now, because I have a plethora of time. Really, I'll realize that at some point these ghosts are going to be consistently be coming to this radio station, trying to slow me down to not being able to tell the people of the town where this fog is going. But then also, like, they're going to kill my power. They're going to probably kill my generator as well. And then I'm just kind of forced to climb up to the roof of this radio station to try and fend off these ghostly beings, until it seems that at a perfect time, this whole ordeal is going to stop. Which I'll play out soon now. After I touch the microphone in my mouth. Delish. I'm having fun. So, we have Nick and we have Elizabeth who make it back into town, trying to figure out where this fog is to have really been making its way or is going to make its way. So it seems while they are going on and driving, they much more so realize that they are forced to make their way to the church, as it seems that is to be the only real protective area, as both Kathy and Sandy are also to realize that as well, as they had gone on to listen to the radio in their car after the whole statue ceremony had left people to all leave to get into their vehicles. So we have our cast of characters making their way to the church. And if Father Malone hadn't scared us before with him being in the church and like coming behind Kathy, Father Malone, it seems, is to realize the frightening notion that he himself may go on and need to be killed to fulfill the ancestral latest Gene Poolish character quota of this film. Because, of course, this is to be very much like the Freddy Krueger like thing, where the sins of the father is to be weighed upon the sins of the son or the daughter. So, Father Malone is to try to figure out some peace offering while to have gone on and started to read this book. And they are to go on to notice within this book that the gold cross had technically been the pirate's treasure. And so Father Malone is to grasp this gold crucifix and is to present this to the ghosts while the rest of the cast are going on and trying to hide in this other room. But Nick is to make his way back to Father Malone as Father Malone is holding this gold cross while trying to give it to this ghost, and the ghost is to hold on to the cross and is to make this kind of unusual like transference of possibly killing Malone as well as also like trying to take this cross. So Nick grabs Father Malone and pulls him off the cross, and it seems that the ghosts are to disappear. And so beyond the like finale usual of Cowabunga, like let's all celebrate because we won this day, I think. And Father Malone is going like, well, why didn't you pick me? Like I'm an old dude. I was tied to my grandfather's story. I'm the last like Gene Poolish thing of that man's loins, so why didn't you kill me, ghosts? And come to find out, the ghosts were like, yeah, like, we almost forgot about that too. Slice your head off. So yeah, like, that's how the movie just kind of wraps up. And really, like, I'm sure there's a number of things that I probably forget during this review, but also, like, I'm surprised that I could have gone on and remembered a good chunk of this. For whatever reason, what have you. I'm sure there's a bunch of dialogue that I was to go on and forget about, but regardless, I feel that this is good enough to put out there in the ether of things. If you were to have one reason or another tuned into the same Fog Time, same Fog channel, thank you for going on and listening for the tale of which that is to have been this review. And I get it that one, these videos are far too long, and one, I'm doing a lot of odd assortment of things, but I'm having fun doing them. Even though the opinion of this film, yeah, I get it. Like, it's like Really, you just kind of give it an okay? Like, that doesn't exactly cement for me to, like, go out of my way to find where to watch it. Plus, also, you can check out this movie on, I even forgot where you can go on and check this movie from. Zelifonic, Zelivonic, but really, it's at the tail end of this review. What point is that? I probably should have gone on in the very beginning of this video, but I completely forgot about it entirely. So, with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.